Good evening again. So we will resume the second technical session. So I welcome for this session CA Naresh Gelli, Regional Council Member, and the speaker of the session, CA Chinnasamy Ganesan, sir. May now request CA Naresh Gelli, the Regional Council Member, to give the speaker introduction.
Good evening to all the members from all across India and the world. Welcome to the second session. We have a very interesting topic for discussion, and we have a very important speaker, C.A. Chinnasamy Ganesan sir from Chennai, who will be addressing us on the topic of interplay between statutory and internal audits. Before I request the speaker to address, I would like to briefly introduce the speaker. C.A. Chinnasamy Ganesan started his practice as a chartered accountant in the year 1988, and he was in personal practice till 2005. He served as a director, partner in a leading firm of chartered accountants, and he has assisted more than 78 plus companies on India's transition. He's also authored a number of books, to name a few: a quick reference on IFRS and model question answer, the revised Schedule 6 Ready Reckoner, India's quick referencer, and the Ready Reckoner for financial statements under Schedule 3 of the Companies Act 2013. He was co-opted member of the Accounting Standards Board of ICAI, which is the apex body of the financial reporting standards in India, and India's Transition Facilitation Group as well. He was also the co-opted member of India's Implementation Committee of the Auditing and Assurance Standards Board of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. CA Ganeshan has advised many boards on Indian and multinational companies, and presently an independent director in the board of directors of Railtel Corporation of India Limited, a mini Ratna public sector undertaking under the Ministry of Railways. He is, he is presently a co-opted member of different organizations. Friends, this is a very brief profile of CH and Sami Ganeshan. I'm sure it would be a very interesting session on the topic of interplay between statutory audit and internal audits.
Thank you, sir. We now have the e-felicitation of the speaker. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Naresh Gelli, the Regional Council member, the Chairman of Southern India Regional Council, and my good friend Dungarchand, and the office bearers of the Southern India Regional Council. First of all, I appreciate the entire effort of the Southern India Regional Council for having conducted first of its kind a virtual regional conference of the Southern region, inviting the Honorable Finance Minister and other dignitaries virtually on this, and with a record number of registration. And my sincere thanks also for the selection of this particular topic, interplay between internal and statutory audit. Normally, whenever we are talking about audit, we focus our points only on the statutory audit aspects, because compliance is coming in respect of the statutory audit, and auditors are making a report in respect of the statutory audit which they have conducted. But when we are talking about the load of the statutory auditor, we have understood that the transactions are becoming complex, transactions are becoming voluminous, and because the transactions are voluminous, it may not be possible for the statutory auditor to complete the entire audit by verifying the entire level of transactions to that extent of the reporting requirement. In some cases, dependence on the work of another expert is expected to be done. This expert which we are talking about is also coming from our fellow member, and he is going to help us in doing our audit in a more efficient and effective manner. And that is what we are talking about, whether there could be a possible interplay between the statutory audit and internal audit. We normally believe that the work of a statutory auditor and the work of an internal auditor are completely independent and they are not integrated. But if you are able to believe my statement, you can see that a very synchronized work between the internal audit and the statutory audit will be much more effective than doing the statutory audit on our own. That is what one of the important points which we have to look into. And this is an opt topic which has been selected by the organizers, and we will proceed on this particular slide deck. Before we go into the points, I would like you to see a small video clip, and we will have a debrief on this video clip after this over.
What this organization desperately needs is change. Easily erasable. Camlin whiteboard markers.
What is happening in this video is actually the expectation gap. When we are thinking about something and wanted to implement something as a new way of doing our audit, and change management is one of the important points, but the way in which we are communicating and the way in which the counterparty has understood will be a completely different perspective. So if you see whether the expectation gap between the various stakeholders and the statutory auditor, along with the internal audit function, is a moving target. When I'm saying it's a moving target, it's not a static one. It is increasing or dynamic on time to time. Over a period of time, it is actually moving on, and it has to be met by the statutory auditor as well as the internal auditor. And a well-coordinated effort is what we are looking for. If you are looking into this particular thing, you will see the stakeholders are various stakeholders, right from the financial institution from where the organization has taken a loan, or the strategic investor who are planning to pump in money for the end company, and the owners, who is the promoters of the entity, who are looking for how their wealth can be accumulated by means of the good performance of the company, and the shareholders who are non-controlling interest or minority interest stakeholders, and how their interest can be protected, and the way in which the independent directors are conducting the affairs of the company or being actually looking at an overseeing body with the performance of the board of directors is all which we are actually looking into. And apart from that, every part of the company, including the employees, are also looking at how the company is being managed, how the company is reporting, how the company is preparing and presenting its financial statement, whether the profits which has been declared is in accordance with their expectation is also coming in. Even the customers and vendors are also looking at the financial statement of the company and the corporate governance which they are managing, so that their relationship with the company can continue to be there. That's the way in which they are looking into. And of course, the regulators are closely watching the profession as well as the companies, especially when the companies are listed, because of certain issues which we have seen in the past, and that should not be repeated. That's the way in which it's being done. Analysts make a critical assessment of the financial statement, including the disclosures which has been made by the companies. So they are also focusing on that. And of course, finally, we have the society at large looking for the corporate entity to work in such a manner that it is paying back to the society as well. Not only on the CSR, but also how the nation's growth can be achieved. That's what we are looking for. In simple terms, if I am saying the gamut of the corporate governance runs across multiple stakeholders, as we have seen in this particular slide. Evolving the best fit corporate governance framework requires meeting these expectations and challenges. But as we have seen, this expectation and the reality is actually having a gap. and the gap is a moving target. It's not static. That's what we are going to discuss in detail. When we are seeing is the expectation gap is a moving target, let us understand a simple expectation of what you are looking from the statutory auditor's perspective, from the stakeholders, and what the stakeholders are looking at the internal auditors. Both we will look into this. If you see that from the external auditor's perspective, the expectation is that there should be an independent opinion on the financial statement of the company, whether it contains any material misstatement as a whole, either due to fraud or error. So there should not be an error, there should not be a fraud, and even if there should not be a material misstatement. That means the user's point of view, the financial statement will not be acceptable and they will take a different decision. When we are going to the internal audit function, we are seeing that they are expected to provide independent assessment of the state of internal controls in the company. Because as a statutory auditor, when I am looking into the verification of the financial statement, validating various components of the financial statement, validating various ledger balances of the financial statement, what I am looking into is very simple, whether the internal controls are existing and they are operating effectively. If they are existing but not operating effectively, I could not rely on the controls. If it is operating effectively, I would like to test the operating effectiveness. But if some other fellow professional who is doing the similar job can give an assurance to me that the internal controls are operating effectively, that's the way in which the interplay between the statutory and the internal auditor can be very well achieved. That is exactly what we are looking for. And when we are actually seeing the expectation and what is the challenges, one of the challenge which we are seeing is that the information received by the statutory auditors are actually handled by the management and its team. So accordingly, reliance on the source of information itself is the first challenge which the statutory auditor will have. And in that process, if somebody who is closely working with the company on a regular basis, for example, if the statutory auditor comes and completes the audit once in a quarter for say 10 days or 15 days or maybe a week's time, depending upon the size of the company and complexity of the transaction, whereas the internal audit function is doing the work more intensively and more time is being spent, their concentration on the entire work will be much higher and their knowledge will be much higher, whether the data which has been provided by the management can be validated by the internal audit is one thing which the statutory auditor is looking as one of the biggest interplay between the statutory audit and the internal audit function. And another important point is the perception which people are having with respect to the statutory audit. Because the statutory audit, in the view of the management, in the view of the stakeholders, is considered as an investigating work rather than doing an audit. In fact, when we are talking about that, I wanted to share one of my experience in an audit which has been obtained by us because of the rotation of the previous auditor, and we have been appointed by the group as the auditors. When I had the first meeting with the CFO, group CFO, and we wanted to establish the relationship so that the coordination of the audit function and the finance function could be very well synced so that there is no surprise at the end of the audit. And also the audit will be very smooth. That's the way in which we wanted to maintain relationship. We conducted an initial meeting with the group CFO, but the group CFO's first reaction to our request for an appointment was, I am too busy and you can have the discussion with my finance controller. With the finance controller, a senior partner normally doesn't want to speak because he wanted to understand what the management believes with respect to the financial statement and what is the management estimates, judgments, expectations, etc. So we have insisted that we wanted to meet the CFO. And finally, he has agreed for the meeting. When we went and met, the first statement the CFO has made to me as a senior partner of the firm is that our group has appointed you as the auditor to hold the audit for the next 5 years. That is the only relationship I have with you. And accordingly, I am not bothered about how you wanted to build the relationship with me personally and with the company on a long-term basis. Let us be very, very technical on discussing what is the matters. This was a statement which has been made. Normally, we will be taken aback when somebody is making this type of arrogant statement, if I am permitted to use that word. Some of my friends in the profession who are in the industry should not feel bad. Some of the people are like that. Okay. So if this type of statement is coming in, how you will react if you are also have the similar feeling of arrogance? You will have a reaction with a different scenario, that the relationship will get impacted on the same moment, because he believes that we are coming to do an investigation, and that is in his mind. So to move this from his mind or erase this particular impression from his mind, we have worked hard. The first meeting was not fruitful. The second meeting was a little bit improved, and the third meeting was okay. And the fourth meeting, he has understood that what we are trying to do is to manage the expectation of the stakeholders, and at the same time not being an investigative personality and trying to be part of the work as a team, keeping our independence as part of our backbone of the entire structure of our audit process. And you will not believe, friends, after the end of the first year of audit, first quarter of the audit, when the audit committee has met, he has made the statement, even before I have started the presentation by the statutory auditors. He is the same CFO who has said that my relationship with you is because you have been appointed by the group, that too only on the numbers and nothing more than that. He made a statement, for the first time we have met a professional person to interact with the company, understanding the problems of the finance team and how he can simplify the process and making us to handhold the entire process. Actually, he said that the audit team has handheld the entire finance team for their complete preparedness for the year end. That is the way in which we are expected to change. But for your information, this we could achieve with the help of the internal audit team, because we have spent a lot of time in understanding how the internal audit team is working on this. Okay, that is what is an important point when we are talking about interplay between the statutory and the internal audit. And of course, we have established direct channels to reporting to the audit committee as well. That is one of the important aspects. When we are coming to the requirement of how we will integrate the internal audit for communicating or completing our statutory audit responsibility, one of the things which I believe is that we have to consider certain concerns which the statutory auditors are having when we start doing the statutory audit, and how the internal audit can help in coming over this particular concerns, or maybe help in achieving certain, at least 50% of the concern will be erased. That's what we are looking for. Let us look at the concerns one by one. First of all, I'm talking about industry benchmarking. When I do an audit of a company, what I normally try to do is, I wanted to check whether the company's performance vis-a-vis the peers' performance are reasonable, or something is unusual with what the company is reporting. So when I'm doing an industry benchmarking, I have a very lighter wine quote. There was a question which has been asked to a kindergarten student, where they have said that if you are having $10 with you and your father is having $10 with him and he gives $5 to you, how much dollar you will have? Simple question has been asked to the teacher. The student said $10. He said, I think that you have not understood the question. I will repeat the question again. You have $10. Your father has $10. Your father has given $5 to you. What would be the number of dollars you will be having? The child again said $10. The teacher said, I think you have not understood mathematics. 10 plus 5 should be $15 which you will be having. Then the child very calmly said, teacher, I know max. If you asked what is 10 plus 5, I might have told 15. But you asked, my father will give $5 to me. I understood Max, but you never understood my father. He will never give it to me. So that's the way in which, when we are looking in benchmarking the people, our expectation of one company's performance with the other company's performance is also going for a different task. So that is a challenge which the auditors are always looking for that. In fact, when we compare benchmarking, one simple example which we can have is that every company in the industry is forecasting a negative growth or reporting a negative growth in the particular quarter, and also forecasting it will continue in the current year, balance 2 to 3 quarters also. But your client is reporting a continuous increase in the growth rate. That itself is something unusual. How this phenomena or how this benchmarking can be acceptable, or whether it is reliable, whether some information is there, I have to do a lot of work. That work can be supplemented by relying on the work of an internal auditor. Whether numbers smells good is another point which we are normally asking. How numbers can smell good? It is not like in Madurai, where the king has a doubt whether the lady's hair is having a natural smell or it is because of use of flowers and other costumes and cosmetics, etc. But finally, the God has to come and has to give just judgment on this particular point. For an auditor, how the numbers can smell good? A simple trend analysis. I can give a simple example of it. Simple trend analysis. What is your sales last year? What is your debtors last year? What is your sales this year? And what is your change in the debtors in the current year? That will give you a simple answer whether you can rely on the debtors number or whether you can rely on the sales number, whether your operating profits are acceptable or you are relying on borrowing and your working capital is blocked in your debtors, whether the debtors are real debtors or focused debtors. All these answers can come out with a simple trend analysis of your sales and debtors. That is again is a laborious job. And when we are doing this work also, we wanted to understand a lot of insights about the company. And that's where we are looking for that. For example, another example which I can share from a client experience. We have seen in a particular year, the consumption of raw material for the company has abnormally increased. We were worried how it is possible that the company which is having a straightforward sales transaction, long-term contract with the customers, and purchase is also being done little bit of forward contract. They have fixed the rate also. How it is possible? So when we are looking for, we have selected some samples and we have actually identified one of the possible root cause of the error is that the company's purchases, which are US dollar denominated imports, have been wrongly accounted as euro-based transaction because of an error in the ERP where they have a flagging has not been made whether it's a US dollar customer or a euro customer or supplier. That is actually missing, and to that extent there was something which we have to take into consideration. And for doing the detailed analysis, because of voluminous of transaction, we have supplemented the work to the internal auditor to some extent within the law which has been permitted. Again, friends, I am trying to say that relying on the work of an internal auditor and giving the work to the internal auditor is permitted as per the standards on auditing, subject to certain precautions which you have to take into consideration. The next issue is off-balance sheet items, contingent liabilities, contingent assets, whether they have to be accounted for or not to be accounted for, whether the provision has to be created or not to be created. Lot of interaction is required. And here also the concerns of the statutory auditors is increasing. Estimates and significance. A provision for doubtful debts, a simple example, or a provision for a slow-moving or non-moving inventory, or an impairment testing for an assets of a big company. Even a simple recent experience of COVID-19 related assessment on the numbers is also a judgment which auditor has to look into how the management is getting their comfort on this particular area of estimates and judgments. Suspense and clearing accounts, more than the statutory auditor looks into that, the internal auditor is looking into that particular aspect. That is again is an area where we have to look into that. Business transactions are becoming so complex today. What was a simple purchase and sales transaction? Now purchases have been done through some sort of transactions with forward contract accounting, options accounting, etc. And where the sales transactions are netted off with even a share-based payments. Complexity is coming in every walk of life with respect to the business transaction. And with all these increasing impact, the biggest challenge is the pressing trade lines. Even today, when I was sitting just before entering the studio along with one of my professional friend, the first question he is asking me, as if I am the regulator, he is asking me, is it possible that this deadline for December 31 will be further extended? Because everybody is believing that the deadlines which has been fixed for completion of an audit, completion of a professional work requires a lot of time to be spent, but the timelines have been already fixed and it's pressing the emergency button to be completed. Stakeholders are believing that if the auditor has verified and signed off the financial statement, it is a blessed material. It is free of errors, free of mistakes, free of frauds. But friends, please understand, if there is a performance pressure and incentive and there is an orchestrated fraud by the management, it is very difficult for any audit tool to identify that particular item. And accordingly, in this situation where the concern of the statutory auditor has to be addressed, we believe that we have to see what is the changing role of internal audit function. Again, I will request your attention to the small video clip to break the monotony of the presentation.
Our company has a new strategic initiative to increase market penetration, maximize brand loyalty, and enhance intangible assets. In pursuit of these objectives, we've started a new project for which we require 7 red lines. I understand your company can help us in this matter.
Of course. Walter here will be the project manager. Walter, we can do this, can't we?
Yes, of course. Anderson here is our expert in all matters related to the drawing of red lines. We've brought him along today to share his professional opinion.
Nice to meet you. Well, you all know me. This is Justine, our company's design specialist. Hello. We need you to draw 7 red lines, all of them strictly perpendicular, some with green ink and some with transparent. Can you do that?
No, I'm afraid...
Let's not rush into any hasty answers, Anderson. The task has been set and needs to be carried out. At the end of the day, you are an expert.
The term red line implies the color of the line to be red. To draw a red line with green ink is, well, if it's not exactly impossible, it's pretty close to being impossible.
What does that even mean? Impossible, I mean.
I mean, it is possible. There are some people, say, suffering from color blindness, for whom the color of the lines doesn't really make a difference. But I'm quite sure that the target audience of your project doesn't consist solely of such people.
So in principle, this is possible.
I'll simplify. A line as such can be drawn with absolutely any ink, but if you want to get a red line, you need to use red ink.
What if we draw them with blue ink?
It still won't work. If you use blue ink, you'll get blue lines. And what exactly did you mean when you talked about the transparent ink?
How to better explain? I'm sure you know what transparent means.
Yes, I do.
And what a red line means. I hope I don't need to explain to you.
Of course not.
Well, you need to draw a red line with transparent ink.
Could you describe what you imagine the end result would look like?
Oh, come on, Anderson, what have we got here? Kindergarten?
No, I'm just trying to get...
Let's not waste our time with these unproductive quarrels. The task has been set, the task is plain and clear. Now, if you have any specific questions, then go ahead.
You're the expert here.
All right, let's leave.
The expectation of the client is to have red line drawn with green ink. When he is trying to explain, if you are putting using a green ink, what you will get is a green line. The manager is saying that what you are talking about impossible, he is actually laughing at his expert. And when they are talking about this, the top management comes in and say that, why can't you draw with blue ink? And client makes it more complex by saying, we want green line with transparent ink. So that is the level of expectation from the internal audit function. what is impossible is expected to be performed by the internal audit function. And the statutory auditor is also adding fuel to the fire by saying that this is my expectation and I wanted to rely on your work. And how this can be achieved? Because the financial reporting is actually going for beyond the financial statement. Integrated reporting is one of the important things which is coming in. I will just share you a simple question which has been asked. Which aspect of the internal auditor's roles is a primary importance in terms of value to the statutory auditor as well as to the management? This is a simple question survey which has been conducted. If you see, 72% of the people have said assurance that major business risks are being managed appropriately, because a material misstatement can come if the business risk is not managed properly and it is not addressed properly. 72% of the people are talking about it. So 68% of the people are saying that internal control framework is working effectively. Again, as I have mentioned, that if it is working effectively and it's operating effectively, my reliance on substantive work or detailed audit work is restricted. And of course, 41% are talking about is there any new business risk based on the development in the current year, and that how it is addressed, whether the internal audit function has taken into the consideration of that aspect. Interestingly, detection and prevention of fraud and irregularities comes as a last point of discussion. So people are now not worried about detection and prevention of frauds and irregularities, rather than they are believing that the business risk has been addressed, internal control framework is operating effectively. The once that has been achieved, automatically the prevention and detection of errors and irregularities will be taken care. That may be the reason why 30% only is talking about it. And another challenge which the internal audit function is having, and why the statutory auditors has to rely on the work of the internal auditor to a great extent, is a rapidly changing regulatory environment. Again, in a statistics, people have said 73% of the respondents believe that the risk management practices in India needs to be significantly improved. 54% have talked about the independent director's role or empowering them will improve the performance significantly. 62% of them have said audit committee skill sets has to be increased from low to medium. And 57% of the respondents have said that board members rarely or never get right of information and enough time to review the activities, including the discharge of this. But please see this last result which has come in. 77%, highest number of respondents. 77% of the respondents believed that internal auditors' responsibilities extend beyond internal control statement assessment and include areas such as risk management and process improvements. That is what is expected. And once that has been taken care, risk management and process improvements has been achieved, the reliance on the financial statement numbers flowing from the system for the statutory auditor can be understood properly. In fact, that I believe is one of the very, very important aspect how the interplay between the statutory and the internal auditor can be achieved. And of course, we are talking about fraud risk, but fraud risk, as I have said, only 30% of the respondents are talking about, but the impact of a fraud being occurring, the magnitude and the impact will be much, much higher. Again, if you see that the fraud triangle, which was a theory, 69 plus 24%, nearly 93% is coming because of an opportunity to commit fraud and because there is an incentive and pressure to perform. So in those circumstances, the early warning signals can be understood by the internal auditor. And that, if it is reflected in their report, will be a much more tool for the auditors to focus on their particular audit procedures in such a manner that it will take care of safeguarding the interest of all the stakeholders. I just wanted to put you in the evaluation of the internal audit right from our traditional method, where we have actually looked into for a simple checklist approach, a financial statement focus, and post-mortem work. That is what people always used to say. So you are only doing a post-mortem of the transactions, which I know that there is an error, but Don't worry about that. What is going to be given to me? You never worked on the business perspective at all. The operational areas have been totally ignored. That's what we are seeing in this particular thing. The green shows what is being done by the internal auditor, and what you are seeing in the red is totally ignored. And when we are talking about the transition which is actually happening, you see that the profession is also meeting competition, including the internal audit function. So because of that, process and compliance review becomes one of the focus point for the internal audit. And the problem is we never considered the size and complexity of the transaction. That is becoming another issue which we are having with respect to the transition period where we have done it. And in the modern internal audit, which we call that as a modern internal audit, what we are talking about is concentration on process and control review. Business risk-based approach is being applied by even the internal auditors. That is exactly what the statutory auditor is also doing. Statutory auditor is actually looking for what is the key business drivers. If something goes wrong on the key business drivers, what would be the impact on the companies? Whether the key business drivers, when it has been properly achieved, whether the numbers will smell good, and whether it doesn't result in a material misstatement in the financial statement. Exactly that is what the modern day of internal audit is also looking into. That's where we believe that an interplay between the internal audit and statutory audit will be a very, very coordinated effort which can help the entire stakeholders of a corporate sector. But still, there are some areas where it is not properly handled because we have not fully considered the complexity of the transaction business process areas, not fully considered. And what could be the futuristic? That's a question which we are having, and we are regularly having certain buzzwords like artificial intelligence. And we are hearing something called data analytics. I will share you one artificial intelligence experience which we are talking about with respect to the internal audit in one of the company's performance is that a client makes a purchase order through an email and has an email being read by an artificial intelligence. We call that as a bot. So there is a bot which is sitting in the client's place, and that bot has a user ID and password to enter into the email system, and the email which has been marked is coming to the bot, and bot enters into the computer system by logging in with the username and password, reads the email, understand what this email is talking about because it's a placement of the order, converts that into an Excel based template, and based on that it places an order that this is what the customer has asked for, it places an order, prepares a order acceptance form, electronically signs that and sends the order requirement to the production team, and at the same time sends to the commercial department and also checks whether the raw material stock is available for the particular production, and if it is not there, makes an order with the supplier who can deliver within the timeline for making this particular schedule, ensure that the logistics is being taken care. All these things are done by a simple bot, not by human intervention at all. So 60% of a routine job in any organization can go on that. And when we are doing an analysis of this particular activity, unless we are talking about doing this entire activity, then it will be an issue for the internal audit function to effectively perform and the statutory auditor to reliably rely on the work of the internal auditor. So this is what I was trying to cover. What is the traditional approach and what is the expected approach? We are moving towards enhancing the business performance focus rather than enhancing the control focus. That's what the role of an internal audit function, and that is expected to be the part of the role of the internal auditor. If you see that, what we are looking for is understanding the entire activity and what can go wrong, and we are talking about developing audit programs and testing the operating effectiveness and what is the root cause for any failure or any mistakes which has happened, recommending process improvements, and of course documenting the reporting. This is what traditionally an internal audit function used to do. But what is new? We are expecting the internal auditor to think out of the box, lateral thinking, because business transactions are becoming complex. We wanted the internal audit function to use advanced data analytics because 100% of the transaction can be analyzed and you can identify whether there is anything which can identified as part of the internal audit observation and done it. Fishbone analysis is like a root cause analysis. You know that fish has a lot of big bones as well as small bones, and what makes the issue you can actually analyze this. And the sixth one which we are talking about is the sixth thinking hat. That means the auditor cannot just do a function of keeping simply that I wear only one hat. I have to wear several hats. Just a simple analysis of how the transaction has emerged over a period of time, why the advanced data analytics has to be performed by the internal auditor, and how the reliance can be done by the statutory auditor as part of their role. The volume of information available in the past is this much, and in the present it is increased reasonably, and what is expected is to grow substantially. And if you see what is the complexity of information, it is almost same like the information which we have received. But in the present, it has increased, and in the future, it is phenomenally going to increase compared to what we are seeing with the volume of transaction. That is where we are believing that an effective use of a data analytics can help the internal audit function will be more effective and more efficient and helpful to the statutory auditors. And this is what we are talking about, advanced data analytics. In fact, when you are doing advanced data analytics, you actually cover 100% of the transaction, no sample. And in fact, I should share with my experience that we have developed a tool based on simple Excel, where we have analyzed a listed company's transaction for the whole year and identified by means of creating 275 plus exceptions, completed the entire review and found out the areas where we have to focus on and ask for the client's further explanation within a period of 2 days. Collecting the data was actually taking 1.5 days. Processing this entire thing with the model took only half a day. And then consolidating took another 1 day. Looking into that and getting certain things to be eliminated as not to be worried about took another 1 day. So effectively on the 5th day, we know where the numbers can materially go wrong, or whether this number requires an explanation by the management with supporting audit evidence which has to be collected. That is what advanced data analytics actually talks about. As I have said, if you are talking about a fish and you have a problem identification to be done, you are expected to do a complete analysis of the entire bone which the fish has. That's a detailed analytics which we are talking about. And the sixth thinking hat is one theory which is talking about, traditionally we have only a black hat, where we believe that what can go wrong. But we are expected to wear many hats, a positive approach with a yellow hat, a control and planning and monitoring the entire work, and where we are using another hat, and we are also talking about whether we wanted to be neutral or just as an investigative personality, and whether we have to be creative. Yes, auditors are expected to be creative, both internal as well as statutory auditors, because out of the box thinking sometimes helps in understanding that this could be an area where we have to focus firstly on that. Experience also helps in being creative, and of course, you should always look for your gut feeling wherever there is there. So the internal auditor, if he wears the sixth thinking hat, the auditor can wear only one hat, whether to rely on the work of the internal auditor or not to rely on the work of the internal auditor. That is the important area of the interplay between the statutory and the internal auditor. I should just say that we are depending on the independence of the auditor, competence of the internal auditor, and what is the objective of the internal auditor. Suppose if the internal audit function directly talks to the audit committee, I am comfortably good to rely on the work. Materiality of the financial statement, based on which some of the account balances can be verified by the internal auditor, and I can rely on the work. That's what the standards on auditing is saying. Risk of material misstatement which has been assessed, what and how I can rely on the assertions in respect of the significant account balances is another area based on which I can put the work to the internal auditor, and subjectivity involved in a particular evaluation of the audit evidence. In that case, normally I will keep that work to be with me as a statutory auditor. And in fact, if you believe that the subjectivity is not very great, it's a straightforward transaction, but voluminous assessment or validation has to be done, that work can be entrusted to the statutory internal auditor. That is what the standards on auditing is talking about. The perfect coordination between the internal audit and statutory audit can be achieved by review and agree the scope of the internal auditor. Majority of the time, we are missing this. We are worrying about this only in the audit committee meeting, where the internal auditor is making a presentation and the auditors are believing that they have just done a vouching, not even verified the controls. But what is expected is upfront discuss and agree the scope of internal audit right from the first quarter itself, so that the internal audit can very well work with you. And you can have a regular coordination with the internal auditor to discuss some of the controls, transaction balances, and you can actually give the work to them and follow up the work performed by them. Re-performance of the test of controls, which has been already done in respect of significant account balances, can be done by the auditor, statutory auditor, rather than starting from the scratch, because already a professional has done it and he has exercised his experience, judgment, and also the expertise, and based on which we can also draw certain controls. And finally, perform independent substantive test, because ultimately the overall responsibility falls with the statutory auditor. Naturally, it is expected that you should always look into completing your own agreed responsibility on the class of transaction, account balances, and disclosure, because the presentation, disclosure, etc. has to be validated, and the auditor is expressing an opinion on that particular aspect. And how to achieve this is very simple. Regular scheduled coordination meetings with the internal audit and statutory auditor. That is very important. And prepare an integrated audit program. Some of the areas where I am saying that it can be allotted to the internal auditor, you can decide and give it to them. You can share some of the areas which are more of routine work to the internal auditor, discussing the possible accounting and auditing issues. Don't think that the accounting and auditing issues is only for the statutory auditor. If you have identified, you can actually share this with your internal auditor and say that, sir, these are all the areas where we have found out some accounting issues or auditing issues. Can you look into that further and give us more comfort? That is the interplay between the statutory and the internal audit. And of course, you can even think about, on a go-forward basis, making a joint presentation to the audit committee and to the board of directors on the findings. Having said that a well-coordinated effort and very fruitful way in which you can manage the entire work with the expertise, objective, and the level of work which is being performed by the internal auditor can be achieved by the statutory auditors. And we are seen the complete interplay between the statutory and internal audit. Only question which still in my mind, like all of you, is that are we end up doing this? Are we end up doing
what's
this?
the status with the linear solutions? Could you give us the latest on the Square project?
The Linear Solutions Department has, yet again, functioned at full capacity, and we have fulfilled 114% of this month's objectives. You can read the handouts for a detailed account, but in short, as I reported last week, we've decided to use the right angle for the Square project. Now, there's still some debate as to how big a right angle is, so we're testing currently at 90, 97, 100, and 101 degrees. As agreed, I've ensured Anderson cross-checks the design, removing any left angles, and doesn't use them in future. Overall, we have very good progress with the design.
Are we on track with the schedule? When are we required to start delivering?
I'm happy to report that we are ready to start first deliveries tomorrow, which is way ahead of the requested delivery schedule.
We've only just finished system testing the prototype and are only halfway through performance testing. We haven't even released an alpha version yet.
As I said earlier, we've had very good progress with the design.
Yes, we've had very good progress, but I'd say the design of the product is only 75% complete.
Well, exactly. That's 3 out of every 4. So we're ready to start shipping tomorrow.
What? It doesn't work like that.
We'll produce, say, 4 units, but only ship the first 3. Then when you're finally 100% complete with the design, we can then ship the 4th.
Excellent work, Timothy. You can proceed with the production. Anderson, send me please a revised delivery schedule so I can share it with the client. Well, thank you everyone. This was very productive. Yet again.
You may be wondering, in 2 videos you have seen the same person who is at the receiving end. I'm not sure whether it's a statutory auditor or the internal auditor. But what is happening here is he is talking about prototype. It's only 75% ready, not even tested. But what they are saying is 4 machines has to be supplied. You are saying 75% is ready. That means 3 can be shipped tomorrow and 1 can be done when you are completing 100%. And that is what we are end up in doing with all these experience, all these learnings. We are going back to square one sometimes. And my friends, my sincere request to all of you is that please look with a different angle how internal audit and statutory audit can work as a team and a perfect interplay can be achieved. With that, I thank the entire region and the conference coordinator, the chairman, and the regional council members for the excellent opportunity which has been given to me. And my contact details are available. And any questions which you are having, you can post, and it will be my responsibility to ensure that you are getting the right answers at the right point of time through the regional council office. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a lively session, sir. You have very beautifully brought forth the links and connectivities that exist in whichever job we may undertake. You kept us all captivated and attentive with your practical examples, references, anecdotal videos, and by sharing your own experiences. Whichever side of the desk we may be sitting on, I'm sure all our members found it very educative and enlightening. Thank you for your valuable time, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine.
I now request CA G. Jayaseelan, co-convener of the 52nd Regional Council of Regional Conference of the SARC of ICAI 2020, to present the memento to our speaker.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.